The shot rang out across the dusty main street of Shoshone City, Idaho, and Delilah Landry watched her father crumple to the ground before the banker's cruel smile even faded from his face. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, her 22 years of life suddenly collapsing into this single moment of horror as blood spread across his chest like spilled wine, staining the deed he clutched in his weathered hands. The paper that represented everything they had worked for, everything they had built together over the past 5 years since her mother's death, now slipped from his fingers as his eyes went vacant and still. "Well now," the banker, Horace Grimsby, said coldly, his pistol still smoking in the September afternoon heat of 1878. "Guess that settles the matter of who owns that land. Without a male heir, the property reverts to the bank for unpaid debts." Delilah's hands shook as she cradled her father's head, her dark hair falling loose from its pins to curtain her tear-streaked face. "There are no unpaid debts," she choked out, fury mixing with her grief. "Papa paid every cent. That land is ours, free and clear." "Was," Grimsby corrected, holstering his weapon with the casual indifference of a man who knew the law was on his side. "Past tense, girl. And even if there were no debts, which I assure you my records will show there are, a woman cannot own property in this territory. Best you pack your things and find yourself a husband quick before you end up on the streets." The small crowd that had gathered murmured, but no one stepped forward. Fear of Grimsby and his hired guns kept most decent folk silent in Shoshone City, and Delilah had learned long ago that justice was a luxury afforded only to those with money and power. Her father had been neither rich nor influential, just an honest rancher who had scraped together enough to buy a modest spread of land with good water and better grazing. She looked down at his face, peaceful now in death, and something hardened in her chest. The grief would come later, she knew, in the dark hours of night when she was alone. Right now, she needed to survive. She needed to fight. "The deed has his name and mine both," she said, her voice steadier now as she picked up the blood-stained document. "I am a co-owner. This land is half mine by legal right." Grimsby laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Show that to any judge in the territory, girl. See how far it gets you. Your father might have put your name on that paper, but it does not mean a damn thing in the eyes of the law." He turned to walk away, and Delilah felt her world tilting sideways. Her father lay dead in the street, murdered in broad daylight, and his killer would face no consequences. The land they had built together, the ranch where she had learned to rope and ride, where she had tended sick cattle through frozen winters and birthed foals in the spring, where every fence post and water trough represented their shared sweat and dreams, would be stolen from her simply because she had been born female. "Someone fetch the undertaker," Grimsby called over his shoulder, "and tell the sheriff we had an unfortunate accident here. Man went for his gun, forced me to defend myself." That was a lie, Delilah knew. Her father had been unarmed, had simply been arguing with Grimsby about the banker's claim that money was still owed. But lies became truth in Shoshone City when Grimsby told them. She sat in the dust beside her father's body as the crowd dispersed, as if death were just another inconvenience in their day. The sun beat down mercilessly, and flies were already beginning to circle. She should move, she knew. Should get him out of the street, prepare him for burial, begin the 1,000 tasks that came with death. But her legs would not work, and her hands could not stop trembling. "Madam?" The voice was quiet, respectful, with a slight drawl that marked the speaker as someone from further south. Delilah looked up to find a man standing a few feet away, hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and sandy blonde hair that needed cutting. His eyes were a startling blue-green, like shallow water over rocks, and they held something she had not seen much of today: genuine sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss," he said. "That was murder, plain and simple, and everyone here knows it." "Knowing it and doing something about it are two different things," Delilah said bitterly. "True enough." He glanced around, then moved closer, lowering his voice. "Name's Preston Payne. I am just passing through looking for work, but I saw what happened here. If you need someone to testify to the truth of it, I will stand up and say what I saw." "And get yourself killed for your trouble?" Delilah shook her head. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Payne, but Grimsby owns the sheriff and most of the territory judge, too. Your testimony would not matter, and you would just end up dead in the street like my father." Preston's jaw tightened, and she saw anger flash in his eyes. "That is not right. No, it is not, but it is the way things are." She forced herself to stand, her legs shaky beneath her dark calico dress. "Now, if you will excuse me, I need to see to my father." "Let me help you," Preston said, moving forward before she could protest. He bent and lifted her father's body with surprising gentleness, cradling the dead weight as if it were precious. "Where do you want him?" Delilah blinked back fresh tears. "The undertaker's shop is 2 streets over. Mr. Carson will know what to do." They walked in silence through the dusty streets, past the saloon, where piano music jangled inappropriately cheerful, past the general store, where Mrs. Henderson quickly turned away rather than meet Delilah's eyes, past the hotel where Grimsby's hired guns lounged on the porch like waiting vultures. Delilah felt their eyes on her, assessing, calculating. She was alone now, unprotected. They would be wondering how long it would take to drive her off her land, what methods Grimsby would employ. The undertaker's shop was cool and dark, smelling of sawdust and embalming fluid. Mr. Carson, a thin man with kind eyes and gentle hands, took her father's body from Preston and laid him out on a preparation table with practiced care. "I heard what happened," Carson said quietly. "Thomas was a good man. He did not deserve this." "No, he did not." Delilah's voice cracked and she cleared her throat hard. "I want him buried properly, Mr. Carson. On our land, on the hill overlooking the valley. Can you arrange that?" "Of course. When would you like the service?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if that is possible. I do not want to leave him waiting." Carson nodded. "I will have everything ready. And Miss Landry, about my fee. I can pay." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small leather purse she always carried. Her fingers counted out bills automatically, though her mind felt distant from her body, as if she were watching herself from very far away. "That is too much," Carson protested gently. "Keep it. You have always been fair to us." She turned blindly toward the door, needing air, needing space, needing something she could not name. Preston was waiting outside, leaning against a post with his arms crossed. He straightened when he saw her. "Where can I take you, Miss?" "Landry. Delilah Landry." She looked at him properly for the first time, taking in the worn but clean clothes, the gun belt slung low on his hips, the saddlebags thrown over one shoulder. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Payne? You said yourself you were just passing through. This is not your fight." "Maybe it should be," he said quietly. "I have drifted for 3 years now, since I lost my own family to cholera back in Kansas. Been working cattle drives, odd jobs, whatever I could find. But I have never been much good at walking away from injustice, and what I saw today was about as unjust as it gets." Something in his voice, in the set of his shoulders, told Delilah he was telling the truth. In a town full of cowards and criminals, she had somehow stumbled across a man with principles. It was almost funny, in a horrible sort of way. "I appreciate that, Mr. Payne, truly, but there is nothing to be done. The law is the law, and according to the law, I cannot own property. Grimsby will take my land, and I will have to find somewhere else to go. That is just the way of things." "Is it?" Preston's eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because seems to me that deed you are carrying has your name on it. And I have been all over this territory, worked on dozens of ranches. Some of them had women running things just fine, law or no law. Maybe what you need is someone who will stand up and say that deed is legal, and that you have every right to your property. And who would do that? Grimsby owns everyone who matters." "Not everyone." Preston settled his hat back on his head, and something in his expression shifted, became determined. "Miss Landry, I know we just met, and you have got no reason to trust me, but I am a fair hand with cattle, good with a gun when I need to be, and I have got nothing tying me down anywhere else. If you need help working that ranch, proving you can run it, I would be willing to hire on, and if Grimsby or anyone else tries to push you off your land, well, they will have to go through me to do it." Delilah stared at him, searching for the angle, the hidden motivation. Men did not offer help without wanting something in return. She had learned that lesson hard over the years. But Preston's blue-green eyes were steady and honest, and she found herself wanting desperately to believe him. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you risk your life for a stranger?" Preston was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the mountains that ringed the valley. "My sister was 19 when she died," he said softly. "Her name was Caroline, and she was fierce and stubborn and twice as smart as me. She wanted to go to college, become a teacher, make something of herself. But our parents said education was wasted on girls, that she should just focus on finding a husband. The cholera took her before she ever got the chance to prove them wrong. He looked back at Delilah, and she saw old grief in his eyes. I think about her sometimes, wonder what she could have become if people had just given her a chance. Maybe I cannot change what happened to Caroline, but I can sure as hell make sure another woman gets to keep what is rightfully hers. The words hit Delilah like a physical thing, breaking through the numbness that had been holding her together. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. I do not even know if I can afford to pay you, Mr. Payne. My father and I, we put everything we had into that ranch. There is not much cash money left. Room and board is payment enough for now. We can work out details later, once things settle. Preston held out his hand. What do you say, Miss Landry? Want to give Grimsby a fight he is not expecting? Delilah looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong, offering help when she had none. She thought about her father, lying dead in the undertaker's shop because he had dared to stand up for what was his. She thought about her mother, who had worked herself to an early grave trying to make their small ranch succeed. She thought about all the dreams that had died in the dust of this hard land, and then she thought about surrender, about walking away, about letting Grimsby win. She reached out and clasped Preston's hand firmly. I say let us give him hell, Mr. Payne. The ride out to the ranch took 40 minutes at a steady pace, Preston following on a rangy buckskin gelding, while Delilah led the way on her father's gray mare. The land gradually shifted from the dusty streets of Shoshone City to rolling grassland dotted with sage and rabbit brush, the Snake River glittering in the distance like a ribbon of silver. It was beautiful country, harsh but honest, and Delilah felt some of the tightness in her chest ease as they rode farther from town. The Landry Ranch sat in a natural bowl between two ridges, protected from the worst of the winter winds. 500 acres of decent grazing land, with a creek that ran year-round fed by snowmelt from the mountains. The house was small, just 3 rooms, but solidly built from logs her father had cut himself. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a corral for the horses, about 60 head of cattle bearing the Landry brand, a simple L with a bar through it, grazed in the near pasture. It was not much, but it was hers, the first place she had ever truly felt at home. Nice setup, Preston said, pulling his horse up beside hers. Your father built all this himself? With my help, Delilah said, pride creeping into her voice despite her grief. We came here 5 years ago after Mama died. Papa wanted a fresh start, somewhere without so many memories. We lived in a tent the first winter while we built the house, and I learned to rope and brand that spring. He taught me everything he knew about ranching, said I had a natural gift for it. I can see why. Takes good sense to pick land like this. Preston dismounted and began loosening his saddle, clearly comfortable with the routine. Creek never runs dry? Not once in 5 years. It is fed by springs up in the hills. Delilah slid from her own horse, her body aching with exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried her through the afternoon was wearing off, leaving her drained and hollow. There is a spare room in the house, or you can sleep in the barn if you prefer. I will understand if you want to keep your distance, given that it is just the 2 of us here. People talk. I will take the barn, Preston said immediately. Last thing you need right now is more trouble, and you are right that folks will gossip, but I will be close enough if you need help with anything. Delilah nodded, grateful for his understanding. There is a pump by the house for washing up, and I can fix some supper once I get a fire going. It is not much, just beans and cornbread probably, but you are welcome to share. Sounds perfect. Preston hauled his saddle toward the barn, his horse following placidly. I will get the animals settled and then come help with whatever needs doing. Delilah watched him go, this stranger who had inserted himself into her life at the worst possible moment, and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake trusting him. But there was something solid about Preston Payne, something that reminded her of her father, a quiet competence, a straightforward honesty that was rare as gold in these parts. She turned toward the house, her steps heavy. Inside, everything was exactly as her father had left it this morning when they rode into town. His coffee cup on the table, still half full, his jacket hanging by the door, his reading glasses on the mantel next to the daguerreotype of her mother. The ordinary details of a life interrupted, frozen in time. Delilah sank into a chair and finally let herself cry. Great wrenching sobs that tore through her chest and left her gasping. She cried for her father, for her mother, for the unfairness of a world that valued property over people and men over women. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted and numb. A soft knock at the door pulled her back. She wiped her face roughly and called out, "Come in." Preston entered, hat in hand, his expression gentle. "I am sorry to intrude. Just wanted to let you know the animals are all settled. Your cattle look healthy, good weight on them, and that buckskin of mine gets along fine with your horses." "Thank you." Delilah's voice was hoarse from crying. She stood, smoothing her dress self-consciously. "I should get started on that supper." "How about I do it?" Preston suggested. "I am a fair hand in the kitchen, spent years cooking over campfires on cattle drives. You have had a terrible day, Miss Landry. Let someone take care of you for once." The offer was so unexpected, so kind, that Delilah felt fresh tears threatening, but she blinked them back and nodded. "All right. Thank you." She sat and watched as Preston moved around her kitchen with easy efficiency, building up the fire in the stove, finding the beans and cornmeal without needing to ask where things were kept. His movements were economical, practiced, and there was something soothing about watching someone else take charge, even of something as simple as making a meal. "You said you work cattle drives?" she asked, needing the distraction of conversation. "For 3 years, after the cholera took my family. Spent most of that time trailing herds up from Texas to railheads in Kansas and Nebraska. Hard work, but honest. Met all kinds of men, learned which ones you could trust and which ones would steal your last dollar." He stirred the beans, added salt. "Got trampled by a steer last spring, broke 3 ribs and punctured a lung. By the time I healed up, the outfit had moved on without me. That is when I started drifting, looking for something more permanent. And you ended up in Shoshone City." "Lucky me," Preston said dryly. "Though I suppose if I had not been here today, you would be facing this alone, so maybe it was meant to be." "Do you believe in that?" Delilah asked. "That things happen for a reason?" Preston was quiet for a moment, his attention focused on the cornbread he was mixing. "I believe we make our own reasons most of the time. We make choices, and those choices have consequences. But every now and then, and I think fate gives us a push in a certain direction. What we do with that push is up to us." It was a thoughtful answer, more philosophical than she had expected from a drifting cowboy. Delilah found herself studying him more closely, noting the laugh lines around his eyes, the scar on his jaw, the way his hands moved with confidence and care. They ate in companionable silence, the food simple but good, and Delilah discovered she was hungrier than she had realized. Grief had a way of hollowing you out, making you forget basic needs. But Preston's quiet presence made the empty house feel less lonely, and she was grateful for that. After supper, Preston insisted on cleaning up, while Delilah sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The land looked peaceful in the fading light, beautiful and eternal. Her father would be buried on that hill tomorrow, would become part of this landscape he had loved so much. "I will make sure the deed stays in your name," she said, when Preston joined her on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "I will fight for this place, no matter what it takes." "I know you will," Preston said, handing her a cup. "And I will be right there fighting with you." "Why?" Delilah asked again, because she still did not quite understand. "Why does this matter so much to you? It is not your land. You have got no stake in this." Preston sipped his coffee, his gaze on the darkening horizon. "Maybe I am tired of seeing good people ground down by those with more power and money. Maybe I want to believe that sometimes the little guy can win. Or maybe—" He paused, then looked at her directly. "Maybe I just think you deserve someone in your corner, Miss Landry. Everyone deserves that." Delilah held his gaze, seeing the sincerity there, the quiet determination. In the space of a few hours, this stranger had shown her more loyalty than most people she had known for years. It was overwhelming and humbling and terrifying all at once. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "You are welcome." Preston finished his coffee and stood. "I will be in the barn if you need anything. And Miss Landry, lock your doors tonight." Grimsby is not the type to give up easy, and we should not take any chances." Delilah nodded, a chill running down her spine at the thought. She had not considered that Grimsby might try something tonight. But Preston was right. The banker wanted her land, and with her father dead, she was vulnerable in ways she had not been before. After Preston left, she checked all the windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. Her father's rifle hung over the fireplace, and she took it down, loading it with practiced ease. She had learned to shoot when she was 15, had spent hours practicing until she could hit a target at 100 yards. Tonight, she was grateful for that skill. She lay in bed fully clothed, the rifle beside her, and listened to the sounds of the night. Crickets chirping, cattle lowing softly in the distance, the wind sighing through the eaves. Ordinary sounds, but tonight they felt ominous, full of hidden threat. Sleep came in fits and starts, broken by nightmares of her father's murder, of Grimsby's cold smile, of rough hands dragging her from her home. When gray dawn finally crept through the windows, Delilah rose feeling more exhausted than when she had gone to bed. Preston was already up, she discovered when she stepped outside. He had milked the cow and fed the chickens, had checked on the cattle and horses. He looked up from the corral where he was examining a fence post and touched his hat in greeting. "Morning, Miss Landry. How did you sleep?" "Not well," she admitted, "but better than I might have without you here. Thank you for handling the chores." "Just earning my keep." He hammered the fence post back into place with a few solid strikes. "I was thinking after the funeral today, we should ride into town and file that deed at the Territorial Land Office. Make sure there is an official record of your ownership, separate from whatever doctored books Grimsby might have at his bank." Delilah's heart sank. "The land office is run by Samuel Porter. He and Grimsby are close friends. I doubt he will file anything that goes against Grimsby's interests." "Maybe not, but we should try anyway. Make sure he has to refuse you in front of witnesses. The more people who know you are fighting for your rights, the harder it will be for Grimsby to just take what he wants without consequences." It was sound strategy, Delilah realized. Build a record, create evidence, make noise. Force the corruption into the light where everyone could see it. "All right," she agreed. "We will go after we bury Papa." The funeral was a small affair. Just Delilah, Preston, Mr. Carson, and a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through. They stood on the hill overlooking the valley, while the preacher said words about dust and ashes and eternal rest. Delilah barely heard him, her attention fixed on the simple wooden coffin that held her father's body. "Thomas Landry was a good man," she said when the preacher finished. "He was kind and hard-working and fair. He taught me to ride and rope, to read the weather and tend sick cattle. He taught me that land is more than property, that it is legacy and responsibility and home. I will not let anyone take that from me. I promise you, Papa, I will keep this ranch safe. I will make you proud." Her voice broke on the last words, and Preston stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. They lowered the coffin into the ground together, and Delilah threw in the first handful of earth. The sound it made hitting the wood was final, absolute. Her father was gone. She was alone. Except she was not alone, she realized, looking at Preston. Not anymore. They filled in the grave in silence, building a cairn of stones over it to keep animals away. Delilah placed wildflowers on top, purple asters and yellow rabbit brush, the colors bright against the gray stones. "He would have liked this spot," Preston said quietly, "being able to watch over everything he built." "Yes," Delilah wiped her eyes. "He would have." The ride into Shoshone City was tense, both of them watchful for trouble. But the streets were quiet when they arrived, most folks going about their business as if yesterday's murder had not happened. Delilah felt anger burning in her chest at the casual indifference, but she kept her face neutral as they dismounted in front of the land office. Samuel Porter was a heavy-set man with mutton-chop whiskers and calculating eyes. He looked up from his desk when they entered, his expression immediately suspicious. "Miss Landry, what brings you here?" "I need to file this deed," Delilah said, placing the blood-stained document on his desk. "Establish the official record of ownership for the Landry Ranch." Porter picked up the deed, his nose wrinkling at the dried blood. "This was already filed when your father purchased the property 5 years ago. There is no need to file it again." "I want to make sure my name as co-owner is in the official records," Delilah pressed. "That there is no question about my rights to the property." "Your rights? Porter laughed, the sound unpleasant. Miss Landry, I am afraid you do not have any rights to this property. A woman cannot own land in Idaho territory. This deed, whatever your father might have written on it, is not legally binding as far as your name is concerned. Then change the law, Preston said, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Or at least file the deed as it is written and let a judge decide what is legal and what is not. Porter's eyes narrowed. And who might you be? Preston Payne. I work for Miss Landry. I see. Porter leaned back in his chair, studying them both. Well, Mr. Payne, I am afraid the law is quite clear on this matter. Miss Landry, as a woman, cannot own property. When her father died, the land reverted to the bank for settlement of debts. There are no debts, Delilah said sharply. My father paid off the mortgage 2 months ago. The land is owned free and clear. According to whose records, Horace Grimsby holds the only legal accounting of transactions related to this property, and he has informed me that there are substantial debts remaining. That is a lie. Careful, Miss Landry. Accusations of dishonesty against a respected banker could land you in serious trouble. Porter stood, clearly signaling the conversation was over. My advice is to pack your belongings and vacate the property. Mr. Grimsby has been generous enough to give you 1 week to make other arrangements. After that, his men will remove you by force if necessary. Delilah felt fury rising like bile in her throat. That land belongs to me. My name is on that deed. Your name means nothing, Porter said flatly. Not legally, not in any way that matters. Go home, Miss Landry. Find yourself a husband. Let the men handle business matters. Preston's hand moved to his gun, and Delilah quickly grabbed his arm. Do not, she said quietly. It is not worth it. For a moment, Preston looked like he might ignore her, his jaw tight with anger. But then he nodded curtly and stepped back. This is not over, he said to Porter. I believe it is. Porter picked up the deed and held it out to Delilah. Take your paper and go. Outside, Delilah leaned against the hitching post, shaking with rage and helplessness. He will not even file it. They have decided I have no rights, and there is nothing I can do about it. There is always something you can do, Preston said. We just need to figure out what. Like what? Ride to Boise and plead my case to the territorial governor? Write to Washington and ask them to change the laws? None of that will happen fast enough to save my land. Preston was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Then he said slowly, What if we made Grimsby's life difficult? What if every time he tried to take your land, we pushed back, made it cost him more than it is worth? How? By making sure everyone knows what he is doing, by getting the other ranchers on your side, by proving you can run that ranch just as well as any man. Preston looked at her intently. Grimsby's power comes from fear and silence, so we take those away. We make noise. We force people to take sides. It was risky, Delilah knew. It would make them targets. But what choice did she have? Surrender or fight? And surrender meant losing everything. All right, she said. Let us make some noise. They started with the other ranchers, riding out to neighboring spreads to explain what had happened and ask for support. The reception was mixed. Some, like old Jeremiah Mason, were sympathetic but unwilling to cross Grimsby. Others, like the Garrett brothers, laughed at the idea of a woman running a ranch and told Preston he was wasting his time. But a few listened. Sarah Jenkins, a widow who ran a small sheep operation with her 2 sons, clasped Delilah's hands and said she understood what it was like to fight for your place in a man's world. Dutch Henderson, a gruff cattleman with a reputation for fairness, said he had never liked Grimsby's methods and would spread the word about the injustice. It was not much, but it was something. A few allies, a few voices willing to speak up. While they were building support, Preston started teaching Delilah everything he knew about defending property. He showed her how to set up early warning systems using tripwires and bells, how to position herself in a gunfight to minimize exposure, how to read tracks and signs of trespassers. If Grimsby sends men to force you off, Preston said one evening as they practiced shooting, you need to be ready, not just ready to fight, but ready to win. Delilah aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger. The bottle she had been targeting exploded into shards. I have been shooting since I was 15. I can handle myself. I do not doubt that, but shooting targets and shooting people are different things. You need to be prepared for how it feels, what it does to you. Have you killed men? Delilah asked quietly. Preston reloaded his own gun, his movements automatic. 3. 2 were self-defense, clear-cut situations where it was them or me. The third, he paused. The third was a man beating a woman half to death in an alley in Dodge City. I told him to stop. He went for his gun instead. I did not hesitate. Do you regret it? Killing him? No. But I regret that the world is such that killing was necessary. Preston met her eyes. If it comes to that, Delilah, if Grimsby's men come and you have to shoot, you cannot hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed. Can you do that? Can you pull the trigger knowing you might take a life? Delilah thought about her father, lying dead in the street. She thought about everything she had built and everything she stood to lose. To protect my home, yes, I can do that. Good. Preston's expression softened. I hope it does not come to that. But we need to be realistic about what we are facing. As the days passed, Delilah found herself relying more and more on Preston's steady presence. He worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, checking cattle, doing all the heavy labor that her father used to handle. But he also talked to her like an equal, asked her opinion on ranch decisions, listened when she explained her plans for improving the breeding stock. It was different from how men usually treated her. Most saw her as either a burden to be managed or a conquest to be pursued. Preston saw her as a person, capable and competent, worthy of respect. And slowly, without quite meaning to, Delilah found herself noticing other things about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, the careful way he handled the animals, patient and kind, the fact that he always made sure she ate, that he checked on her when she was quiet, that he seemed to know when she needed space and when she needed company. She was falling for him, she realized one afternoon, as she watched him work with a young horse, his voice low and soothing, as he gentled the skittish animal. It was foolish and dangerous and completely inappropriate given the circumstances, but her heart did not seem to care about any of that. Preston looked up and caught her watching. Something wrong? No, Delilah said quickly. Just thinking. About? Everything. The situation with Grimsby. What happens if we lose? She hesitated, then added, what happens if we win? Preston walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. If we win, you keep your ranch. You prove that a woman can own property and run a successful operation. You become an example for others. And you? Delilah asked. What do you get if we win? He was quiet for a moment, his blue-green eyes serious. Maybe a place to call home, maybe a chance to stop drifting and put down roots. Maybe... He stopped, seeming to catch himself. Maybe we should not get ahead of ourselves. We have still got a fight on our hands. But the words hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibility. Delilah felt her breath catch, felt the world narrow down to just the two of them standing in the afternoon sun. The moment was broken by the sound of hoofbeats. They both turned to see a group of riders approaching, 6 men in dark clothes with guns prominent at their hips. Delilah recognized the leader immediately. Frank Stone, Grimsby's head enforcer, a man with dead eyes and a reputation for cruelty. Miss Landry, Stone called out as they drew closer. Time's up. Mr. Grimsby wants you off this land by sundown. This land is mine, Delilah said, her hand moving instinctively toward the rifle she had leaned against the corral. I am not leaving. That is unfortunate? Stone's smile did not reach his eyes. Because we have orders to clear you out, one way or another. You can go peaceful, or we can make it unpleasant. Your choice. Preston stepped forward, positioning himself between Delilah and the riders. The lady said she is not leaving, so I reckon you fellows should turn around and head back to town. And who are you supposed to be? Her husband? Stone laughed. Last I heard, Miss Landry was unwed, which means she has got no legal claim to this property and no legal right to have armed men defending it. I have got every right to defend my home from trespassers, Delilah said sharply, and Mr. Payne works for me, which gives him every right to be here. Works for you with what money? Stone's eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. Everyone knows you are broke, Miss Landry. Your father spent everything he had on this place, and there is nothing left. So, either you are paying this cowboy with something other than money, which makes you a whore, or he is just squatting on property that belongs to the bank, which makes him a criminal. Preston's gun was in his hand so fast Delilah barely saw him move. The barrel pointed directly at Stone's chest. Apologize to the lady, now. The other 5 riders reached for their weapons, but Stone held up a hand, stopping them. His smile widened, clearly enjoying the tension. "Touchy, are we? Hit a nerve, did I?" "I will not ask again," Preston said, his voice deadly calm. For a long moment, no one moved. The air felt thick, charged with violence waiting to break. Delilah's heart hammered in her chest as she calculated odds and angles. 6 against 2. They would die here, she realized, if this turned into a gunfight, but they might take a few of Grimsby's men with them. Stone's eyes flicked from Preston to Delilah and back again. Whatever he saw in Preston's face made him reassess. "My apologies, Miss Landry," he said, the words dripping with insincerity. "I spoke out of turn." "I think you and your men should leave now," Delilah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We will go," Stone agreed. "But we will be back, Miss Landry, and next time we will not be asking permission." He turned his horse, the other riders following suit. "You have got 3 days. After that, this ranch belongs to Mr. Grimsby, and anyone on it will be treated as a trespasser. That includes your guard dog there." They rode off in a cloud of dust, and Delilah finally allowed herself to breathe. Her legs felt weak, and she grabbed the corral fence for support. "That was close," she said. "Too close." Preston holstered his gun, his jaw tight. "They will be back, just like Stone said. And next time, they will come ready for a fight. Then we need to be ready too. Delilah?" Preston turned to face her, and she saw fear in his eyes for the first time since they had met. "This is getting dangerous, real dangerous. If you want to reconsider, if you want to cut your losses and leave, I will understand. I will even help you relocate somewhere safe." "This is my home," Delilah said fiercely. "My father is buried on that hill. My mother's memory lives in every corner of that house. I will not abandon it because some criminal banker and his hired thugs think they can intimidate me. I will fight for this place until I have got no fight left." Preston studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. Then we fight. But we do it smart. We send word to the allies we have made. See if any of them are willing to come, help us defend the property. We set up defensive positions around the house and barn. We make sure we have enough ammunition and supplies to hold out if they try to siege us. And if none of that is enough, then we go down fighting." Preston's expression was grim but determined. "But we do not go down easy." They spent the next 2 days preparing for war. Dutch Henderson and his 2 ranch hands arrived the morning after Stone's visit, bringing extra ammunition and supplies. Sarah Jenkins sent her oldest son, a strapping young man of 20 named Thomas, who could shoot straight and was not afraid of trouble. "My mother says to tell you she is with you in spirit," Thomas said, "but she cannot leave the sheep unattended, or she would be here herself." It was not a large force, just 6 people total, counting Delilah and Preston, but it was more than she had hoped for. They fortified the house, boarding up windows and creating firing positions. They set up watch rotations, making sure someone was always on guard. They moved the cattle closer to the barn, wanting to keep them safe if bullets started flying. And they waited. Grimsby's men came on the 3rd day, just as Stone had promised. But they did not come with 6 riders. They came with 20, a small army of hired guns and thugs, all armed and clearly ready for violence. Stone rode at the front, a white flag tied to his rifle. "We are here to talk," he called out. "No need for bloodshed if we can reach an agreement." "There is nothing to talk about," Delilah shouted back from the window of the house. "This land is mine, and I am not leaving. Be reasonable, Miss Landry. You are outnumbered 4 to 1. You have got no chance of winning this fight. Mr. Grimsby is prepared to offer you a fair price for the land, enough money to start over somewhere else. Take the deal and walk away with your dignity intact." "My dignity is not for sale, neither is my land." Stone sighed, as if disappointed. "That is unfortunate. Mr. Grimsby hoped it would not come to this, but you leave us no choice. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. After that, we will remove you by force." The riders pulled back about 200 yards and settled in to wait, clearly confident that the ultimatum would work. Delilah looked around at the people who had come to help her, saw the determination in their faces mixed with very real fear. "You can still leave," she told them quietly. "I would not blame any of you for deciding this is not worth dying over." "Begging your pardon, Miss Delilah," Dutch said, "but I have lived in this territory for 30 years. I have seen too many good people pushed around by men like Grimsby, and I am tired of it. Maybe we cannot win this fight, but at least we can make a stand. Show folks that some things are worth fighting for." The others nodded agreement, and Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. These people barely knew her, but they were willing to risk everything for a principle, for the idea that right mattered more than might. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. Whatever happens, I will never forget what you were doing for me." Preston moved to her side, his shoulder brushing hers. "We should position people at different windows, create overlapping fields of fire. If they charge, we want to make sure we can cover all approaches." They arranged themselves strategically, Dutch and his men covering the front, Thomas at a side window, Preston and Delilah watching the back and the barn. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness, each one bringing them closer to violence. And then, just as the hour was running out, more riders appeared on the horizon. For a moment, Delilah thought Grimsby had sent reinforcements, and her heart sank. But as the newcomers got closer, she realized these were different men, ranchers from the area, small operators like herself, people she had spoken to over the past weeks. There were at least 30 of them, and they positioned themselves between Grimsby's men and the Landry ranch house. "What is going on?" Delilah breathed. "I sent word," Preston said quietly, "asked everyone we talked to if they would come when the time came. I did not know if anyone would actually show up, but I figured it was worth trying." One of the newcomers, a man Delilah recognized as Marcus Clay from a ranch 10 miles north, rode forward to confront Stone. "There is not going to be any removing today, Stone. Miss Landry has got friends, and we are not going to stand by and watch you steal her land." "This does not concern you, Clay," Stone said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. His 20 men were suddenly outnumbered, and he knew it. "It concerns all of us," another rancher called out. "Today it is Delilah Landry's land. Tomorrow it might be mine. We have all had enough of Grimsby's games." Stone looked back at his men, clearly calculating. A fight was still possible, but it would be costly, and there was no guarantee they would win. After a long moment, he turned his horse. "This is not over," he said, but it sounded like bravado now, empty threat. "Yes, it is," Clay said flatly. "You go back and tell Grimsby that this land belongs to Miss Landry, and anyone who tries to take it from her will answer to all of us. And then you tell him we are going to be talking to the territorial legislature about getting some laws changed. High time women got a fair shake in this territory." Stone did not respond, just spurred his horse and rode away, his men following. They looked less like an army now, and more like a defeated mob, their confidence shattered by unexpected resistance. The ranchers held position until Grimsby's men were out of sight, then began dispersing, many of them stopping by the house to wish Delilah well. Marcus Clay was the last to leave. "Thank you," Delilah said, gripping his hand tightly. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not come." "We should have done something sooner," Clay said gruffly. "Should not have let Grimsby get away with murdering your father. But we are with you now, Miss Landry, and if Grimsby tries anything else, you send word. We will come running." After everyone had gone, Delilah stood in the yard and looked around at her ranch, still hers, still standing. The relief was overwhelming, and she found herself laughing and crying at the same time, months of tension finally releasing. Preston caught her as her knees gave out, holding her steady as the emotions crashed over her. "It is all right," he said softly. "You are safe. The ranch is safe." "I cannot believe they came," Delilah sobbed into his shoulder. "I cannot believe they actually stood up for me." "People are tired of bullies," Preston said. "They just needed someone brave enough to fight back first. You did that, Delilah. You showed them it was possible." She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "We did it. Together." "Together," Preston agreed, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. Without thinking, without planning, Delilah rose on her toes and kissed him. For a moment, Preston went still with surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back with a passion that stole her breath. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Delilah's heart raced, but not from fear this time, from hope, from possibility, from the sudden realization that maybe she had not just been fighting for her land these past weeks. Maybe she had been fighting for a future, one that might include this brave, kind man who had stood by her when no one else would. "I should not have done that," she said. but she did not sound sorry. "I am glad you did," Preston said, his voice rough, "because I have been wanting to kiss you for days now, but I did not think it would be appropriate given everything you have been dealing with." "Appropriate?" Delilah laughed shakily. "Preston, you have been sleeping in my barn, eating meals in my kitchen, helping defend my home from armed thugs. I think we are past worrying about what is appropriate." "Fair point." Preston's smile was crooked, endearing. "So, what happens now?" "I do not know," Delilah admitted. "Everything has been about survival, about the next threat. I have not let myself think past that." "Maybe it is time to start," Preston suggested. He took her hands, his calloused palms warm against hers. "Delilah, I know we have not known each other long. I know the circumstances have been strange and intense. But these past weeks, working beside you, watching you fight for what is yours, I have come to care about you. More than I probably should, more than is sensible given everything. And if you would have me, if you think there might be something between us worth exploring, I would like to stay. Not just as a ranch hand, but as something more." Delilah's heart soared. "I care about you too," she said. "I did not want to at first. It felt like a distraction, something I could not afford when everything was so precarious. But you made it impossible not to care. You showed up when I needed help most, and you have never once treated me like I was less capable or less worthy because I am a woman. You have seen me at my worst, and you are still here. How could I not fall for you?" Preston pulled her close again, resting his forehead against hers. "We can take this slow. Court properly, let people see that there is nothing improper about our relationship. I will move into town if you want. Come out during the day to work." "No," Delilah said firmly. "I do not care what people think anymore. You stay here, where you belong. We will figure the rest out as we go." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the moment. The fear and tension of the past weeks seemed to fall away, leaving room for something new to grow, something tender and strong, built on mutual respect and shared struggle. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and wonder. They ran the ranch together, falling into an easy partnership, where each of them knew instinctively what needed doing. Preston proved to be not just a hard worker, but a skilled rancher, with ideas for improving the herd and better managing the water resources. Delilah found herself excited about the future, in ways she had not been since before her father's death. And in the quiet moments after the work was done, they talked. Long conversations on the porch as the sun set, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Preston told her about growing up in Kansas, about the farm his family had worked, about Caroline and the dreams she had never gotten to pursue. Delilah talked about her mother, about the hard years after her death, about the bond she had shared with her father, and how much she missed his guidance. They talked about the future too, about expanding the ranch, maybe bringing in some sheep like Sarah Jenkins ran, about building onto the house, adding a proper guest room and maybe someday a nursery, about fighting for changes to the territorial laws, making sure other women would not face the same struggles Delilah had. "You know people are going to talk," Delilah said one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge, "about us living here together, unmarried." "Let them talk," Preston said, but there was a question in his voice. "Unless you want to do something about it?" Delilah turned to look at him, her heart fluttering. "Are you asking me to marry you, Preston Payne?" "I suppose I am." He smiled, nervous and hopeful. "I know it is fast. I know we probably should wait longer, do things properly. But the truth is, I cannot imagine my life without you anymore. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I would be honored if you would be my wife." "Yes," Delilah said, no hesitation at all. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Sarah Jenkins and Dutch Henderson standing as witnesses and the traveling preacher officiating. Delilah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and carried wildflowers from the hill where her father was buried. Preston wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion, and his eyes never left Delilah's face throughout the entire ceremony. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with such tenderness that Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes. This was what her parents had shared, she realized. This deep partnership, this joining of lives and dreams. She had thought she might never find it, but here it was, born from tragedy and struggle and the fierce determination to build something worth keeping. The celebration afterward was joyous, with neighbors bringing food and music and well wishes. Even Marcus Clay showed up, gruffly shaking Preston's hand and telling him he had better treat Delilah right or answer to the entire territory. "I intend to spend the rest of my life treating her right," Preston promised, and Clay nodded, satisfied. As evening fell and the guests departed, Preston and Delilah stood together on their porch, watching the last rays of sun paint the mountains gold. The ranch stretched out before them, beautiful and hard-won, a testament to perseverance and love. "Are you happy?" Preston asked quietly. "More than I ever thought possible," Delilah said, leaning into his warmth. 3 months ago, I thought I had lost everything. Now I have more than I ever dreamed of." "We still have challenges ahead," Preston reminded her. "Grimsby has not given up. He is just biding his time, and the laws still need changing. I know, but we will face those challenges together." Delilah turned to kiss him softly, and that makes all the difference. The fight with Grimsby was not over, as Preston had predicted. The banker continued to cause problems where he could, spreading rumors about Delilah's morals, trying to convince suppliers not to do business with the Landry Ranch, even attempting to have Preston arrested on trumped-up charges of cattle theft. But each time Grimsby struck, the community pushed back. The ranchers who had stood up for Delilah that day formed a loose alliance, watching out for each other and refusing to be intimidated. When Grimsby tried to cut off the Landry Ranch from supplies, Dutch Henderson and others stepped in to provide what was needed. When the sheriff came to arrest Preston, 6 witnesses materialized to swear he had been nowhere near the supposedly stolen cattle. Slowly, grudgingly, Grimsby was forced to accept that he had lost this particular battle. The Landry Ranch remained in Delilah's hands, and her marriage to Preston only strengthened her position. Legally, the property now belonged to Preston as her husband, but he made sure everyone knew that Delilah was the true owner, that her name stayed on the deed, that all decisions about the ranch were made jointly. "Her name is on that deed," Preston said firmly whenever anyone questioned the arrangement. "And that is how it is going to stay. This is Delilah's land, and I am just lucky enough to share it with her." The words became a sort of rallying cry in the territory, a declaration that women had just as much right to property and respect as men. Other women began fighting for their own rights, citing Delilah's example. The territorial legislature, pressured by changing attitudes, began discussing reforms to property laws. It was slow progress, frustratingly so at times, but it was progress nonetheless. A year after their wedding, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had helped birth dozens of calves and foals, but bringing a human child into the world felt like an entirely different proposition. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked Preston one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if I am not a good mother?" "You will be an amazing mother," Preston assured her, his own hand covering hers. "You are strong and patient and kind. Any child would be lucky to have you. And if it is a girl, what kind of world are we bringing her into, where she might face the same struggles I have?" "Then we will raise her to fight," Preston said firmly. "We will teach her to stand up for herself, to demand respect, to never accept that she is less than anyone else. And maybe, by the time she is grown, the world will be a little bit better than it is now. We will make sure of it." Their son was born in March of 1880. A healthy baby with his father's blue-green eyes and a fierce cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Thomas, after Delilah's father, and wrapped him in a quilt that Sarah Jenkins had stitched with patches from both their families' old clothes. Delilah had never known love like this, all-consuming and terrifying and perfect. She would lie awake at night watching Thomas sleep, marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. Preston was equally smitten, spending hours rocking their son and singing old cattle drive songs in his rough voice. "He is perfect," Delilah whispered one evening as Preston held the baby. "Just like his mother," Preston said, smiling at her over their son's head. The ranch thrived under their joint management. They expanded their herd, brought in new breeding stock, improved their water management. They built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. They hired a young man named James to help with the heavy work, giving them more time to focus on family. And through it all, they never forgot the fight that had brought them together. Delilah testified before the territorial legislature about her experiences, arguing passionately for women's property rights. Preston stood beside her, literally standing up, when officials tried to dismiss her testimony, his voice ringing out in the legislative chamber. "Her name is on that deed," he said, pulling out the blood-stained document they still kept. Her father put it there because he knew she had earned it, because he trusted her to carry on what they built together. And then he was murdered trying to defend that right. The least we can do, the very least, is honor his wishes and his daughter's claim. If we cannot do that, if we cannot stand up for basic justice and fairness, then what kind of territory are we building here? The speech made headlines, and Preston became something of a folk hero, the cowboy who had stood up for a woman's rights when no one else would. He was uncomfortable with the attention, but he used the platform to continue advocating for change. In 1882, the territorial legislature finally passed reforms, allowing women to own property in their own names. It was not perfect legislation, full of loopholes and restrictions, but it was a start. Delilah stood in the gallery and watched the vote, tears streaming down her face, thinking about her father and wishing he could have lived to see this day. That evening, she and Preston rode out to her father's grave on the hill. Thomas, now 2 years old, sat in front of Preston on the saddle, chattering happily about horses and cows and everything else that caught his attention. "We did it, Papa," Delilah said softly, kneeling beside the cairn. "The law has changed. Women can own property now, truly own it. You and Mama would be so proud." She placed fresh flowers on the stones, yellow rabbit brush and purple asters, just like she had at his funeral. The land stretched out below them, green and gold in the evening light, peaceful and productive. "Thank you," she said, not sure if she was talking to her father, or to the universe, or to Preston, or to all three. "Thank you for everything." Preston's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and solid. "He would be proud of you," he said quietly, "of everything you have built, everything you have accomplished." "We have accomplished," Delilah corrected, rising to take his hand. "I could not have done any of this without you." "Partners," Preston said, squeezing her fingers. "Partners," Delilah agreed. They stood together as the sun set, their son between them, their land spreading out in all directions. It had been a long, hard fight, but they had won. Not just the battle for Delilah's property, but something larger. They had proven that love and loyalty and courage mattered, that standing up for what was right could make a difference, that sometimes the impossible became possible if you refused to give up. 3 years later, in 1885, Delilah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Caroline after Preston's sister. She had Preston's blonde hair and Delilah's dark eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her older brother everywhere, determined to do everything he did. Thomas, now 5, took his role as big brother seriously, patiently teaching Caroline to feed chickens and pet the barn cats and identify different birds. Preston watched them with visible emotion, and Delilah knew he was thinking about his own sister, about the life she never got to live. "She would have loved this," Delilah said quietly one afternoon as they watched the children play. "Caroline. She would have loved seeing her namesake grow up strong and free." "She would have loved you," Preston said. "You are everything she wanted to be, independent, capable, unafraid to fight for what is right." "I learned from the best," Delilah said, kissing him softly. "You showed me that I did not have to face the world alone, that asking for help was not weakness. You saved me, Preston, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Preston corrected. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting, a home to belong to. You showed me that some things are worth fighting for, worth putting down roots for." They had been married 7 years now, and Delilah loved him more with each passing day. The passion of their early relationship had matured into something deeper, steadier, a love built on partnership and mutual respect, and the 1,000 small intimacies of shared life. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Delilah's management skills became legendary, and other ranchers, both men and women, sought her advice. She became known as someone who could read cattle and weather with equal accuracy, who treated her workers fairly, who always kept her word. Preston remained her constant support, working alongside her, but never overshadowing her. When visitors came and assumed he was the owner, he always corrected them immediately. "Her name is on that deed," he would say, the words a point of pride. "This is Delilah's ranch. I am just lucky enough to share it." The phrase had become something of a legend by now, repeated in newspapers and legislative debates, held up as an example of how things could be different if men were willing to stand up for women's rights. In 1887, when Thomas was 7 and Caroline was 2, Delilah and Preston hosted a gathering at their ranch for women ranchers and farmers from across the territory. More than 50 women came, some running their own operations, others partners with husbands, all of them eager to share knowledge and support each other. Sarah Jenkins was there, her sheep operation now one of the largest in the region. The Garrett brothers' widowed mother came, having taken over her son's ranch after they both died in a winter storm. Women Delilah had never met arrived from distant corners of the territory, drawn by her story and her reputation. They talked for 3 days about breeding strategies and water management, about dealing with difficult neighbors and navigating still biased laws, about balancing work and family. They formed a network, promising to help each other, to share resources, to stand together against anyone who tried to push them around. "This is what your father fought for," Preston said as they watched the gathering from the porch. "This community, this strength, he knew you could do amazing things if you just got the chance." "He knew I would have help," Delilah said, leaning against him. "He knew I would find someone who believed in me as much as he did. He was a wise man." The gathering became an annual tradition, growing larger each year. By 1890, nearly 200 women were attending, along with supportive husbands and family members. The Landry Ranch became a symbol of what was possible when people refused to accept injustice, when they stood up for each other, when love and principle mattered more than law and tradition. Delilah and Preston added 2 more children to their family over the years, another daughter named Margaret in 1888 and a son named Daniel in 1890. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and the ranch bustled with life and noise and joy. On warm summer evenings, they would all gather on the porch, Preston playing his harmonica, while the children ran through the yard, catching fireflies. Delilah would watch her family, her heart full to bursting, and marvel at how far they had come from that terrible day when her father died in the street. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked one such evening, settling beside her on the steps. "That I am happy," Delilah said simply. "That despite everything we went through, everything we lost, I would not change a single thing because it brought us here, to this moment, this life. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. They taught us what we were capable of. They showed us who we really were." She took his hand, threading their fingers together. "You stood up for me when no one else would, Preston. You put my name on that deed not just legally, but in every way that mattered. You treated me as an equal when the whole world said I was less. How could I regret anything that led to finding you?" Preston lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I am the lucky one, Delilah. You are the strongest person I have ever known, and I am honored to spend my life beside you." The children's laughter rang out across the yard, joyful and free, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed peacefully. The ranch that Delilah's father had built, that she had fought so hard to keep, that she and Preston had grown together, spread out around them like a promise kept. As the stars began to emerge and the first cool breeze of evening stirred the air, Delilah thought about the future, about Thomas, already showing interest in running the ranch someday, about Caroline, fierce and determined, who insisted she could do anything her brother could do, about Margaret and Daniel, still young, but already learning the lessons of hard work and fair dealing. They would inherit not just land and cattle, but something more precious. They would inherit the knowledge that fighting for what was right mattered, that standing up against injustice could make a difference, that love and partnership were stronger than any law or tradition. "We should tell them the story," Delilah said suddenly. "When they are older, I mean. Tell them everything that happened, why this ranch is so important." "We will," Preston promised. "We will make sure they know what their grandfather sacrificed, what you fought for, how we built this life together. They will know that their mother was brave enough to stand up to a banker and his thugs, smart enough to run a successful ranch, strong enough to change unfair laws. And they will know their father was the kind of man who stood up when everyone else sat down," Delilah added, "who believed in justice even when it was inconvenient, who loved his wife enough to make sure her name was on that deed, no matter what society said. They sat in comfortable silence as night fell completely, the children eventually tiring and coming to cuddle close. Thomas sprawled across Preston's lap, Caroline tucked against Delilah's side, the two younger ones already drowsing with the contentment of the well-loved. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, and the wind whispered through the grass. The land that had witnessed so much struggle and triumph seemed to settle around them like a blessing, ancient and patient and eternal. Delilah closed her eyes and sent a silent prayer of gratitude skyward, to her parents watching from whatever place the dead went, to the friends and neighbors who had stood by her when it mattered most, to the universe itself for bringing Preston Payne to Shoshone City on the exact day she needed him most, and to this land, this beautiful, difficult, precious land that had cost so much but given back even more. "I love you," she whispered to Preston, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling she held. "I love you too," he said back, his arm tightening around her. "Always." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated births and mourned deaths, fought against injustice wherever they found it, and built something lasting and good. By the time 1895 rolled around, Thomas was 15 and already working as a full partner in the ranch. Caroline was 10, determined to become a veterinarian, despite everyone saying that was no career for a girl. Margaret was 7, quiet and thoughtful, showing a gift for numbers that made managing the books easier. Daniel was 5, adventurous and fearless, always getting into scrapes that required rescuing. The ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres, with prime grazing land and water rights that made it one of the most valuable properties in southern Idaho. Delilah and Preston had been approached multiple times by investors wanting to buy them out, but they always refused. This land was not for sale. It was legacy. It was home. It was the physical proof that standing up for what was right could lead to something beautiful. On the 15th anniversary of Delilah's father's death, they held a ceremony at his grave. All 4 children were there, along with Preston and Delilah, standing on the hill as the sun set over the valley. "Your grandfather was murdered here in Shoshone City," Delilah told her children, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. "He was killed because he dared to put my name on a deed, because he believed I had just as much right to own land as any man. They thought they could steal what we had built, thought I would give up without a fight. But you did not," Thomas said. "It was not a question. No, I did not. I stood my ground, and your father stood with me. We fought for this ranch, for the principle that women deserve equal rights and fair treatment, and we won. Not just for ourselves, but for every woman who came after." Caroline moved closer to the grave, reaching out to touch the weathered stones. "I am glad he put your name on the deed, Mama. It was the right thing to do." "Yes, it was," Preston said, his hand finding Delilah's. "And I am proud every single day to tell people that this is your mother's ranch, that her name is on that deed, that she built something extraordinary through courage and determination." They stood together as a family, 5 heartbeats and 1 memory, and Delilah felt the weight of history settle around them. This was why her father had fought. This was why she had refused to surrender, so that these children, and their children after them, would inherit a better world. As they walked back down the hill together, Thomas and Caroline racing ahead, while Preston carried Daniel, piggyback and Delilah held Margaret's hand, she thought about the girl she had been 17 years ago, young and alone and terrified, kneeling in the dust beside her murdered father, certain that she had lost everything. That girl could never have imagined this future, this family, this success, this joy. She could not have dreamed that the cowboy who offered to help would become the love of her life, that together they would build something lasting and important. But here they were, living proof that sometimes the impossible became possible. That love could be found in the darkest moments, that standing up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous, mattered. "Tell me again," Margaret said as they walked, her small hand warm in Delilah's. "Tell me about how Papa stood up for you." Delilah smiled, the story as familiar as breathing by now. "Well, sweetheart, there were all these important men in town saying that I could not own property because I was a woman. They said the deed did not matter, that my name meant nothing. But your papa, he stood right up in front of everyone and said, 'Her name is on that deed,'" all 4 children chorused, having heard the story dozens of times. "That is right," Preston said, grinning. Her name is on that deed, and nothing and no one was going to change that. They reached the house as full darkness fell, lamplight spilling warm and golden from the windows. Inside, there would be supper to prepare, and evening chores to finish, and bedtime stories to read. The ordinary rhythms of family life, precious and mundane and perfect. Delilah paused at the door, looking back at the land that had cost so much and given back even more. The cattle were dark shapes against the dimming horizon. The barn stood solid and strong. The creek sang its eternal song in the distance. This was home. This was everything her parents had dreamed of, everything she and Preston had fought for. And tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that, they would continue building on that foundation, teaching their children, helping their neighbors, standing up for justice wherever they found injustice. "Coming?" Preston asked from the doorway, one hand extended. Delilah took it, letting him pull her into the warmth and light of their home. "Yes," she said, "I am exactly where I belong." And as the door closed behind them, shutting out the night and gathering the family close, the old deed hung on the wall in a simple frame, blood-stained and worn, testament to struggle and sacrifice, but the words still clearly visible. Two names, written in careful script, Thomas Landry and Delilah Landry. Her name was on that deed, and nothing, not death or violence or unjust laws, had been able to change that simple, powerful truth. They had won. Not just the battle for property, but something larger, the fight for dignity and equality and the right to be seen as fully human, fully capable, fully worthy of respect. And every single day, in the life they built together and the love they shared and the children they raised, that victory bloomed fresh and bright as wildflowers on a hill, the end of their struggle, the beginning of their happily ever after.